This is an introduction to civilized. By civilized, I operationally mean an environment where an individual is respected. It's hard for me to talk about being in a civilized society where it's legal to murder conceived infants that are healthy. I don't consider it murder to abort a child who has the misfortune of unhealthy genetic makeup that would have a life of suffering. To me, that's a different matter. There is such a thing as mercy killing, and that is a difficult issue because where one might, out of love, engage in mercy killing of a loved one, a sadomasochistic or narcissistic person could use the same rationale for murdering someone that they're in relationship with. So these are difficult issues. I go back to my childhood with on these issues. My father took us hunting with him from the every day. We would train the dogs in summertime, and in the fall was hunting season for pheasants and rabbits. It was just walk out in the fields behind our home and out into the woods and squirrel hunting. But we had hunting dogs which were very well cared for. We cared for them personally. We loved those dogs, but it wasn't a problem when one got old and sick and was suffering that my father would shoot the dog in the head, so it was instantaneously removed from its pain. So these are difficult issues, but the difficulty I have in society today is the murdering of healthy fetuses, and they even have postpartum killing now. So as far as the history of civilization, I find the background necessary, which I found a very important element after the study of the great apes, is the work referred to by Steven Pinker. The accompanying video is of him at a TED conference. That for millions of years, for forebears lived in a hunter-gatherer society where up to 60% of the men died violently, and the conflict over territory with other tribes was one part, but the main conflict often had to do with attacking another tribe to get their young women and killing the men. There's, of course, a natural law behind this, that is the genetics, inbreeding, destroyed, just like the Renaissance was destroyed by combination of inbreeding. They destroyed, quote, Christian Europe from inbreeding and for the lack of childcare. The affluent women hired wet nurses and babysitters, which deprived their children of the depth that they needed to develop the higher levels of ability to care for others. And that is an epidemic today with daycare and socialism destroying homemaking. As far as the women in this matter, there's a clear understanding. If you look at the way that they, for millions of years, were taken by violence and raped. Still today in southern Russia, my wife was talking to a woman who had a friend in our apartment building, and she was standing outside and would often stand outside and her friend come out and talk to her. Olga was talking to her, and she's there always had her son with her. And she just explained to Olga, yes, she had been stolen. And here, even today, in supposedly modern Russia, in the Caucasus, there are areas where this is still part of the culture. And the idea is that if you steal a young woman and rape her and make her your wife, you've defiled her in the eyes of anybody else. So then the process there goes to negotiating, and you pay the parents for their daughter. They don't want her back because she's defiled. That's a different culture, and it still exists today in what's supposed to be a modern country. But so we can understand some of the differences between men and women. The men that survived were the ones that could work together in the battle, in hunting. And this grew even stronger in the European cultures that hunted woolly mammoths. There's evidence that 17,000 years ago the Europeans were in America, and there is one hypothesis that they hunted the woolly mammoths to extinction and followed them back into Eurasia. And that was in the order of 17,000 years ago, and then a few thousand years later there were Asian invasions of the Americas. But also understanding something, the background, it has an influence on civilizing this men working together. Hunting a woolly mammoth, you've got a couple tons of meat. First of all, it takes a group to kill this mammoth in the hunt, and it takes a group to carry all this meat away. And they did carry it. The evidence of mammoth bone homes in the areas in southern Russia and Ukraine where they had villages indicates that they traveled long distances and brought the meat to their village. Now, how did they travel long distances? And we're talking in the order of 17,000 years ago or 20,000 years ago. In America, if that was true, they dealt with the long distance travel there also. But there is reason to believe that they developed sailing, both boats and rafts, and that they developed a knowledge of how to tell how far north they were. by observing the night stars, by rafting and sailing night and day. They would have watches at night who would observe the stars and knowledge of their reality that they lived in. That at a certain time of year, you could tell by what star was overhead at midnight how far north and south you were, by the angle to the star. This is simply observed, just like the hunting seasons and the breeding seasons were known by the sun, how far north or south it was at noon, and the angle to the sun. So this was a common background in all cultures to understand the motion of the sun through the course of the year. But then to observe the stars was interesting, because they moved as a group as the Earth rotated in the background of stars, and the stars that were overhead changed with the time of year, where they were, the angle to them. You could see them, but the angle was different. And all you had to know was the time of year and what stars, where that star was overhead, told you their latitude. Then they discovered the technique of knowing longitude, how far east and west they were of home, by knowing the time of day. They could observe at midnight what stars were overhead. Exactly at midnight told them how far east or west they were of home at midnight. But it meant they had to have accurate time. Well, a very simple ancient clock was a drip clock. You have one container dripping water and another container collecting water, and how much water has built up in the catch would tell what time of day it is. So they had means of telling latitude and longitude. They developed astronomy, and that had many consequences, both being corrupted into the Mars and Venus. These planets moved among the stars, and so as these sailing people brought civilization to the coastal areas where there was trading and fishing, and men working together in the seafaring business of fishing, developed civil society, that is, areas that were protected and safe, and that built up by the larger and larger cities, and the cities having the ability to protect themselves. Then that's working on the lawn here today. But the ability to sail the ocean by the stars, and the development of cities, and that we need to go to the background of women being taken by rape and violence for millions of years, you can understand they have an ambiguous feeling towards their children. At the same time, it's, oh, what a wonderful mother, and oh, this, we need to care for this sick child. And at the same time, they're killing fetuses and newborns all the time at a tremendous rate. And we look in historically, that was the development of idols as gods, to, like Moloch, to sacrifice the children to, or in the jungle areas they would leave them for the wild animals to eat. There are many insights into this background where children were disposed of. But in Russia today, the abortion rate for the last number of years, for ethnic Russians, the abortion rate is higher than the birth rate. But so we understand where this comes from, that this ambiguous feeling that women have towards children, and especially for an unwanted pregnancy. Well, affluent women want somebody else to care for their baby. They hire wet nurses and babysitters. And today in China, one of the poor farmer woman can be pregnant and have late-term abortion, and go to the city and get a job as a wet nurse. Or it doesn't necessarily have to kill the infant that she had, or leave it with somebody else. But she can get a job as a wet nurse and make good money in big cities, because there's wealthy women there now, and they want babysitters and wet nurses. So what happens with these wealthy, affluent? The children are deprived of what they need to grow to the higher levels of caring for others, not like self. First, they care for any baby that survives, cares for itself, even if it likes to experience pain, sadomasochism, to feel alive. The narcissism is a given foundation. Every child needs to be loved. Every baby needs to be cared for like it's a lord. Just goes, and you run around and change its diaper, feed it, bathe it, hold it, rock it. You care for it. Hopefully with a maternal bond, because the infant knows the mother's voice from when it was inside her. And for months after birth, it has a stress reaction to another woman's voice saying the same thing, or a man's voice. That maternal bond is such an important thing. And in that background also, we know now with the MRIs that autism has to do with having the love and stimulation in the first 6 months. And it doesn't mean that a mother doesn't want to be a good mother. If a mother was raised in daycare, she may not have the mammalian capacity to have a mammalian nursing bond with that child. If you take, my uncle had mink ranch, and if you have babies that were taken away from their mother too soon, they are not able to be high-quality mothers. The same with a puppy taken away from its mother too soon. It's not a good breeding stock. It doesn't care for its young that well. So the nursing bond is a two-way thing. A mother, to be able to give this mammalian level nursing bond, needs to have had it herself for it to develop in her. And the reality of these things is there's a learning to it, but it has to do with at a certain time, like the first 6 months, in certain areas of the brain, there's nerve growth factor present, and the brain needs stimulated in those areas at that time, or the dendrites and synaptic network doesn't form. It isn't more brain cells, it's more of this network growing in the brain because there's stimulation while nerve growth factor is present, and once it's gone, it's gone. The initial experiments that showed this so clearly was with animals that covering their eyes at birth and taking the eye coverings off at different periods of time. And I believe it was with rats, and then investigate after they've gone to adulthood, sacrifice them, and investigate neurologically the visual area of development in the brain. And after a certain period of time, even with the visual stimulation, the visual ability doesn't develop, because nerve growth factor is no longer present. If nerve growth factor were present, it would be a disease. It is a genetic disease in some Jewish people, that the nerves factor is present and that area of the brain keeps growing, and they're disabled people. So that we need to understand the truth of nature, the laws that govern. And in the background here, respect for life. If we understand that it is a process, it's a unbelievable. You look at the moon and how many big bangs it's received, or any other planet. The Earth was stable enough to support life for over 2 billion years without death. A body of life developing, that at any time, at any time that one of your great-grandparents or forebearers back to 1 billion years ago, if that little animal had been killed, that was part of your life, and your life would not exist. You represent a life a couple billion years old, and the wonder that the Earth could be stable enough to support life for a few billion years is unbelievably improbable. And the life cycle of the sun is something in the order of 10 billion years, where it's burning hydrogen, and it will burn up and flare out and destroy the Earth. This is a normal cycle of solar systems, either exploding or going cold dead. So just the reality of it is a wonderful thing, and the greatest thing we can do is care for the future as we've been cared for, whether it's time and chance or by intelligence. So civilization has to do with having a healthy, safe environment for healthy physically and behaviorally and spiritually. When I say spirit, I mean one's outlook. People need to care about the future. The healthy people are the people who care about the future, who are able to go beyond their own narrow self-interest. And so spiritual health is a healthy outlook. How to make it safe for physically and behaviorally healthy people. That's what's important. And then, of course, the other problem comes, and you can see how it's manipulated by violent cultures, like some Islamic cultures. They justify their murder by murdering and then observing the attacks against them as if they were initiated unprovoked. So that's how do you destroy the destroyer? How do you destroy a cannibal culture? This is before I leave this introduction. This sailing was the first building larger cities. The cities were the areas of civil authority, that it was safe to walk around. And the country where nobody was attacking you at that time, but you were vulnerable if you were just a small group out in nature. But the big element that led to civilization was the development of the horse, where one city could attack another speedily. And this process of inter-city conflict, if you read in the Old Testament, at the time of Abraham, they were city-states, and they were in conflict all the time, building larger and larger, and until you had things like Greece building into a nation and conquering others, and then Rome. But go back a little bit to this sophistry, the corrupted upper class and the city-states, where before the horse was even domesticated, the upper class, the affluent, gave, in many cultures, gave their power and property to their eldest son, because to divide it was to lose their power and to set up conflict within the family. So the eldest son often inherited the wealth and power, and that led the other sons of these affluent, the children raised without enough care to be able to really care about other people like themselves, or to care about the future other than their own self-interest. These sons had the fields of military and religion, and led to the sadomasochistic warfare, and led to the sophistry of what do you call it, where here were these sailors that the stars told them where they were, so these the sophists of these degraded aristocracy, many of their sons made themselves stargazers that claimed the knowledge of the stars, that they would be astrologers, that they would tell your fortune. If these stars could guide ships, they guide your life. The stars are gods. Well, if the stars are gods, and they have this knowledge, oh, look at, there's Mars and Jupiter and Venus, and they're going to say they must be super gods. And here you have the Greeks and Romans worshiping Mars and Venus and so on as these super gods that could move among the stars, the other gods. And then here come along a wonderful foundation that we don't recognize, that defended children. Abraham did two things. In the background, the Jewish traditions say his father made idols, and it was a practice in the cities that they moved north from to sacrifice to these idols, and in the country also. That it said that Abraham's father gave up the making of idols in older life and respected his son, because the story of Abraham is the story of a man who changed the sacrifice of children to the sacrifice of animals. And he used as his power that point in the sky where all the gods move around. The North Pole is empty, and in the northern hemisphere all the stars, and Jupiter and Venus and Mars, everything goes around this central point. That must be the powerful point, the most high unseen God. Of course, what Paul said gives a further insight, but I don't want to distract right now. Abraham founded a culture that respected children. No sacrificing children. And they made war on other tribes when Moses came out of Egypt with the people and Joshua. They exterminated other tribes that were sacrificing children. That's true. And Muhammad was taught this by a rabbi when he was a camel driver, and picked up on it, that he could also murder out of his self-interest of serving Allah and bring other tribes and villages into submission, and reward the men with booty and women who would fight with him, and promises of a reward in the afterlife if they were killed in battle. That gives some background into what I mean by civilized. And there are many issues. That this is just an introduction, and I hope this is helpful. Watch the I wanted to mention about Paul. Paul added to insight into what Abraham had said, the Most High Unseen God. And on Mars Hill in Greece, when Paul was there, they had all these worshiping all these different gods, Mars and so forth. But they had a shrine to the unseen God. They didn't want to miss any and offend this unknown God. They didn't want to offend him. And Paul said, that is our God, unknown, but in him we live and move and have our being. And that's the foundation of reality, that matter is not created or destroyed, space is not created or destroyed, and energy isn't created or destroyed. It just changes form. That creation is a process of forming, and destruction is breaking down the form, like making a hat out of material. The creation is the form. That gives some background. I just wanted to mention how foolish the biblicists who say poof, magic creation out of nothing, and the Quran or any of those, the magic creation. And the same is true of the Big Bang Theory. Poof, 10 billion years ago, the universe created by something out of nothing. It's nonsense. Physical reality is eternal. Matter is not created or destroyed, and neither is space. What is finite is the density. The immensity of it is infinite, but the local area, the amount of matter, whether here or off in eternity somewhere, is roughly the same. But that's another area of just a little background for civilized, because these ideas are used to discriminate and teach ignorance and indoctrinate and destroy the ability in children to have common sense. In the man working together for millions of years, they developed the right hand is connected to the left brain, And that's the logical brain in men. The left hand connected to the right brain. I don't know if the video will be seen right and left correctly, but the point is correct. But women didn't have to plan ahead. They had the responsibility of just being homemakers and caregivers for the children. They weren't off fighting, off making battle, off hunting the tiger. And they didn't have this need for logical planning, nor did they have the need to work together as a team. So what survives propagates. Women's brain is different than a men's brain. They don't have this hemispheric specialization. That's why a woman can have a stroke and do better than a man, because both hemispheres work essentially the same. So if the ability to speak is damaged in this side of the brain, the other side of the brain can help out, and vice versa. But these are background matters that we look into later. One of the most important aspects of being civilized is what is referred to as individual sovereignty. This is an important concept because it involves respecting early childhood development. It is relatively easy to create autism, and relatively easy to deprive children of common sense. If you look at these children who are willing to be suicide bombers and look into this, if you look in their faces, it's not hatred. It's a service to God. They've been indoctrinated memorizing the Quran and the teachings of the Quran since they were an infant. And they've been deprived of individual sovereignty. Not functional if it didn't get them at an early enough age. Now, the older populations, what would be equivalent to the hate groups, or the criminal elements that are attracted to Islam because it gives them permission to be violent. That's a totally different category. The young man that murdered 3 Jewish school children and their father. This is March of 2012. This was not somebody indoctrinated from childhood. It was the type of personality that would end up in a hate group, a neo-Nazi group or something like that in another culture. But I'm not talking about that. Those are, because civilization has to do with respecting the individuals and holding the individuals responsible for their actions. Not making excuses for them. They are responsible for their actions. A child molester is responsible. You can go back and look at how the child molester was deprived and maybe think to have pity on them. But here in Florida, we've had such release to go out to murder another little girl. It's insane. I do believe in the death penalty, not to keep these. I don't hate these people. I had to teach math for the bad boys, I called it. It was largely boys that were the school district had to accept from they were expelled from other school districts. That happens. and they can't legally refuse them. So every school district has to put up with this kind of thing. They had a county-wide BOCES, Board of Cooperative Educational Services, and they had a program for them, building trades. I call it, and my superintendent developed a special math course for and put me as the teacher, and I called it Math for the Bad Boys. Most of them had no father in the home and just bad behavior. I learned from them, especially. Hate the sin, but not the sinner. And you can't discipline a child without a relationship. If they didn't do their homework, I worked terribly hard. My master's degree in education was a computerized system for course record keeping, grading, and evaluation. So I graded their papers every day, homework every day. I kept some after school. If they didn't do their homework and I stayed and graded, and I had past students hired to help me grade the questions that were math questions that were simple, right or wrong answers. I graded, they needed to take notes on a movie or whatever every day, and graded on whether they were 10 points for being in class on time, being in their seat, being quiet, a point for each of these. Pencil, paper, their book. If they didn't have their homework, they had to stay after school for an hour. Another teacher said, "Who are you punishing?" I was after school every night for an hour, and up until 11 o'clock grading and recording papers, and spending Saturday making out their weekly report card. As an example of responsibility, I mentioned this. And when first, of course, I had a parents' conference the first week, and told the parents I want to call you when I had to make a contract that they'd help me have their children, and they were all boys, have their boys be responsible and do their work. Well, the first week I hand out the weekly report cards, and this rough guy with a leather jacket, how can you fail me? And I said, I didn't fail you. I just added up your points. It's what you did. And they got the point. But in this, I learned you can't discipline a child without a relationship, and staying after school night after night with them, suffering with them. And that same year, my ex-wife died, and I hired a bunch of these bad boys that had gotten their act together to help me remodel the home I got. After 15 years, it was pretty well destroyed. But that's another story. They're especially good at tearing things down. I didn't want to miss some important points here. Two things. I had an 8-week seminar at the Unitarian Church on the needs of children, a different speaker each week for Sunday afternoon, and it ended up being pretty widely attended by even Catholic nuns and so forth, but interested in this. I had I started at the earliest age with the Commissioner of Health on what's the worst problem for children, and in those days it was Hispanics girl teenage pregnancy, because they were rejected by the family and they were given welfare, but they were not taking care of their children. It was a big public health problem. But different age groups, and went up to the teen years, and I had Dr. Donna from the Western New York Child and Adolescent Psychiatric Clinic. Now, it was a forum on the needs of children, And I introduced the speaker, and after the speaker was done, there was a question and answer period, and I initiated that and had the opportunity for the first question. So when Dr. Donaferio got done, I said, wait a minute. He's talking about the children that have psychiatric problems, because the Child and Adolescent Psychiatric Clinic was a referral center for all the hospitals, schools in Erie County. That's Buffalo, New York. And he had to deal with these daily, and that's what he was his lecture was about. I said, it doesn't sound like you're talking about my bad boys. And I've got these children, boys always in trouble. And he said, no, it's not the boys out on the street that have permanent psychiatric disability. It's the boys that their mother won't let them out of the house because they're not developing normally in their ability to interact with other people. They end up with permanent disabilities. And I was surprised. We had one of the top graduates, a boy, go to Harvard, and before the year was out, he was back washing dishes in the restaurant where I used to go for breakfast. And he was an example of that. He had severe difficulties. His father had been a dentist, or was a dentist, and his mother was interested in him doing well in school and kept him home doing homework and studying all the time. So he ended up with lack of ability to deal with the freedom. I found the same thing with our science curriculum study for 9th graders. It was learning by experiment, working in pairs, a self-pacing program. But the Catholic school in our district had elementary school to 8th grade, but they didn't have activity-oriented programs. In 9th grade, the Catholic students would have to come to the public school. And they were a disaster. As a physics teacher, I had to teach one course outside of my area. Every teacher, no matter what their specialization, had to teach a class of this 9th grade general science. So that got me involved there. And my goodness, the number of problems with the kids coming from the Catholic school, not working, mixing up things to destroy the experience for other children. Had one even put poison in. We had fish there do an experiment with oxygen demand in the water, and class had to get them out of the class. Class was ready to do physical harm to the kid who would kill these fish, but just didn't have the opportunity to learn by experience. They were stuck in the Catholic school. They had large class sizes and were stuck in their room. But the reason I went to this is just like the indoctrination. If you deprive a child of natural experience and indoctrinate them, they can't differentiate intuitively or common sense. Now, when I mentioned about male brain being specialized right and left hemisphere, that helps operationally define. Intuition is the nonverbal hemisphere in a man. He knows, but he doesn't know why. It can tell you. It's not a verbal thing. It's like art and music are not verbal. The logical brain, that's where what we call common sense comes from. But it's only common sense if they have natural experience in physical reality and behavioral reality. If they're stuck, indoctrinated in the Bible or the Quran or any other book, they are deprived of reality. And just like these young children with the face of a baby, with no hate, like a service to God. They're willing to go and murder people, and themselves included, with a suicide mission. It is a crime against humanity to indoctrinate children before they're 12 years old, to let them experience reality, hold them responsible for their behavior, yes, and suffer with them. They need to be disciplined with love, and the person doing the discipline needs to be willing to suffer with them, not reject them, but reject the behavior. Hate the sin, but love the sinner. And that's what I wanted to come back on in this. Well, that's enough for an introduction. I hope you enjoy the review of the presentation of Pinker on the hunter-gatherer culture. Thank you.